introduction, we'll focus on the similarities and differences between woman artists Taylor Swift and Sylvia Plath. Both of these American women have shaped American media for the better and some would argue for the worse. Taylor Allison Swift was born on December 13, 1989 in West Reading, Pennsylvania. Her father was a former stockbroker for Merrill Lynch, and her mother was a former homemaker who previously worked as a mutual fund marketing executive. She was named after singer-songwriter James Taylor, and she spent her early years on a Christmas tree farm. She is a Christian. She was interested in music at a very young age, and at age 9, she was performing in Berks Youth Theater Academy productions. She traveled regularly to New York City for vocal and acting lessons and shifted her focus towards country music after being inspired by Shania Twain's songs in the 90s. She felt she needed to move to Nashville, Tennessee to pursue a career in music, and her supportive mother traveled with her to visit Nashville, and she submitted demo tapes of Dolly Parton and the Chicks karaoke covers. She was rejected, but she kept trying and learned how to play the guitar around 12 years old. She also started modeling for Abercrombie and Fitch. Eventually, after industry showcases and a lot of hard work, including working on songs that she had written herself, she became the youngest artist signed by the Sony ATV Tree Publishing House. But she left at age 14. However, this was not the end of her career. She was putting albums out. Her second studio album, Fearless, was released in 2008, and that album included singles such as Love Story, White Horse, You Belong With Me, 15, and Fearless. Love Story reached #1 in Australia, and Taylor Swift during this time would be seen along the beach in Australia, and her music video for You Belong With Me was named Best Female Video. This was the start of a remarkable career. It's estimated that Taylor Swift has generated over $400 million in revenue just for herself. She is someone that emphasizes visuals as a key creative component of her music making process. She has written songs for many, many artists in addition to herself. She's well known for her philanthropic efforts. She was ranked at #1 on Do Something's Gone Good list and has received Star of Compassion accolades from the Tennessee Disaster Services. She has moved from country music to pop music and expanded into film with a short film produced in 2022. So she is incredibly creative, and her career continues to inspire people today. From the Christmas tree farm to being frightened by a bee during a live interview, nature continues to inspire Taylor Swift, and we see that in this woodsy poet movement from Swift. She's getting into folklore and the influence of her culture on her music with her albums Folklore and Evermore, and this has been described by critics as dipping into a woodsy poet age. It's really remarkable how Swift has been able to translate the cottagecore movement into her music, and it's something that I think Sylvia Plath would appreciate. Sylvia Plath was born on October 27, 1932 in Boston, Massachusetts. Like Taylor, her parents were impressive. Her mother, Aurelia Schober Plath, was an accomplished writer in her own right. She was someone who graduated with a Bachelor of Secretarial Sciences from Boston University, and she was president of the college's German club and editor-in-chief of the college yearbook, and she went on learning and eventually received her master's in 1930. Plath's father was an accomplished entomologist and a professor of biology at Boston University who authored a book about bumblebees. The impact of nature on Plath's work is really remarkable. We see her using natural imagery in pretty much all of her poems, those written at a young age, going into her more hardcore poems such as Moonrise, which is about the color of mulberries. Her love of nature is very apparent. And unfortunately, Sylvia's father died when she was only 8 of complications following the amputation of a foot due to untreated diabetes. Plath was very close to her father. She was ambitiously driven. She was recognized for her love of beekeeping, just as he was. And so this death impacted her severely. And you can see it in her work in Ariel, and also in the poetry where she writes about her daddy. And so in this, we see a similarity between Plath and Swift, that both of them use extreme emotional situations in their art. And we see that Plath is writing about her father's death at a very young age, throughout high school and into college at Smith College. Likewise, Taylor was writing about her breakups and brokenhearted subject matter in her very early work. Both women are sensitive, and they are impacted by the way other people treat them and by the tragedies in their lives. And so with both women, we see poetry and songs as a way for them to understand their heartbreak. Taylor Swift's breakup songs include Teardrops on My Guitar, Picture to Burn, Cold as You, Should Have Said No, All Too Well, and Come Back, Be Here. In Taylor Swift's short film production, All Too Well, we see a red typewriter, which is presumably given as a gift to the female protagonist. This is an incredibly symbolic machine in the film, because it shows that the woman protagonist is transforming her pain into art via the typewriter. Sylvia Plath also worked on typewriters. She wrote her only novel, The Bell Jar, on her typewriter, and she carried her typewriter around with her at Smith College, and you can see it in images where she's writing on a stone wall using this portable typewriter. I don't believe the typewriter was given to Plath as a gift by one of her boyfriends or her eventual husband, Ted Hughes, but it was a very symbolic piece of Sylvia Plath's life, and it actually recently came up for auction. The color red is also an important one here. Red was the number of Taylor Swift's album that was released when she was still a teenager in 2012. The album's title refers to tumultuous red emotions Swift experienced during the album's conception. The songwriting of the album was incredibly vulnerable and something that marked a transition from Swift's prior work. She wrote 25 songs for the album, and in November 2020, there was a dispute over the ownership of the masters to Swift's back catalog, and she began re-recording her first 6 studio albums, including Red. So it's a very important album to her, and when you look through Swift's interviews and work, it's also clear that red is a color that she dips into very frequently. You can find interviews about her favorite red lipsticks, etc. Red was also a key color to Sylvia. It's said that Sylvia only wore red lipstick. She wore no other color throughout her entire life. There are images of her wearing no lipstick at all, so I'm not sure if that's true, but it's clear that she did love red lipstick, and supposedly Plath's favorite color of red lipstick was called Cherries in the Snow by Revlon. Red was a color that Plath did not shy away from in her work. And again, we see this in her poem Moonrise, which is about nature and products of nature turning color and being contrasted with the color white. So red had an extreme impact on Plath as well, so it's interesting to see the two artists congregate around this color. Like Swift, Plath was a multifaceted artist, and so she was a poet and she was an author, but she was also a sketch artist. And these are sketches from her honeymoon with her husband, Ted Hughes, in Europe. Unfortunately, a lot of her sketches have not been published. They are the property of Ted Hughes and his descendants, and so we don't see them come up very often, but I just want to highlight how both women are accomplished in multiple fields. Plath spent a lot of time searching herself, and it's something that she struggled with, and so she participated in artist colonies, for example in Saratoga Springs, New York, and it was something where she needed to learn to be true to her own weirdnesses. But she still had anxiety about writing confessionally and writing in a vulnerable way, from deeply personal and private material. And unfortunately, sometimes her anxiety spilled over and she reacted violently towards her husband, Ted Hughes, and towards herself. Plath tried to kill herself multiple times. She survived her first suicide attempt, partly because someone found her when she crawled under a front porch and took her mother's sleeping pills in 1953. But this was a theme in her life where she just couldn't connect with the inner vulnerability as often as maybe she wanted to or she should have been able to. This is an interesting contrast to Taylor Swift's vulnerability, and she is able to showcase her feelings, including her love life, in detail in many different songs. It's something where it's almost like she connects with her fans, and through this is able to use that vulnerability, that collective vulnerability, in her music. I really wonder if Sylvia Plath had a larger public audience and had published more work before she passed away, if she would have experienced something similar. But even her husband, Ted Hughes, wrote a poem about Sylvia's struggles and said that, quote, "nobody wants your weird dance." And so it was like she was seeking connection and wasn't able to find it all the time, whereas Taylor Swift is able to find that connection, partly due to publicity. Sylvia Plath had no eating disorder that we're aware of. She did have anxiety and depression, which she was treated for in various psychiatric hospitals throughout her lifetime. She did have some body image issues and would meanly refer to her face as rubber occasionally, but there are pictures of her in bikinis, and she was a sensual person. She was comfortable with her own body and her own sexuality. She did not engage in cutting or anything like that. This is a contrast to Taylor Swift, who has been honest about her struggles with eating disorders and body image issues. She's removed scenes of women weighing themselves from her music videos in sensitivity to this. And so I think that this is a contrast between the women. This is something that they are, where they are different. Sylvia Plath found a lot of peace in swimming. In a 1947 letter to her mother, she mentioned a long bike ride to a beach where the waters were a light salty blue and a sandy smooth bar stretched out into the ocean. The water was free from crabs and seaweed, and I went swimming with Sally. We had loads of fun swimming underwater and sitting on the smooth, sandy bottom pretending to comb our hair. At that time, she was in Oak Bluffs, Martha's Vineyard. When she attended Smith College in Massachusetts, this gave her a lot of time to spend exploring the beaches on Cape Cod. In a 1951 letter, she said that she looked at the angry gray ocean, darkening in light twilight, so I put on my bathing suit and ran barefoot down to the beach. It's a queer sensation to swim at night, but it was very warm after the rain, so I splashed and kicked, and the foam was strangely white in the dark. After I staggered out, I put on my sweatshirt and alternately ran and walked the length of the beach and back. As I walked into the house, my purpose accomplished, I said goodnight to the Mayos, who gasped, "You went swimming alone?" After meeting Ted Hughes at Cambridge, where she was attending college in London, The couple stayed at Eastham on Cape Cod in 1957, from where she wrote, "We try to get 4 hours of writing done by noon, bike to Nauset Light Beach for the afternoon of swimming and running, and read books in the evening." This was something where you see a duality between Plath's love of the ocean and a fear of it. She was haunted by images of nautical death and oblivion in the water. In her novel, The Bell Jar, the heroine contemplated swimming out to sea and drowning, but the sea refused to help her. And so again, you see this nature influence and the love of nature that her father gave her. In The Bell Jar, the heroine tries to drown herself, but the water spits her back up. And in one of her last pieces, Plath was fondly reminiscing about living by the sea. "My childhood landscape was not land, but the end of land. The cold, salt, running hills of the Atlantic. I sometimes think my vision of the sea is the clearest thing I own. I pick it up, exile that I am, and in one wash of memory the colors deepen and gleam. The early world draws breath." She died in a city far away from the ocean, and so one can understand her missing the ocean in that piece. With Taylor Swift's music, we also see a resurgence of the beach. For example, her song "Snow on the Beach" was a song that featured Lana Del Rey. There are pictures of her on the beach in Australia when she was younger, where her songs hit #1 in Australia, but generally, we don't see this as much as Sylvia Plath's Love on the Beach, maybe due to, privacy. It's interesting to note that Taylor Swift bought a house right on the beach, though. She bought the Watch Hill Mansion, which is located on Watch Beach in Rhode Island. It's a $17 million mansion, and it's there that she was inspired by a previous owner of the house, Rebecca Harkness. And Swift sung about Rebecca in her song "The Last Great American Dynasty." The mansion has 8 marble fireplaces, a library, a solar room. It's 3 stories with cathedral ceilings and contains a large swimming pool. So I think it would inspire anybody. But it's interesting that Swift chose to write about a previous owner. This is similar to Daphne du Maurier, who wrote about previous owners of her home, Menabilly in Cornwall. So it's not a Sylvia Plath connection, but it's interesting to see these themes of woman writers. While Sylvia Plath never lived in Rhode Island like Taylor Swift, she was a very proud New Englander. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts, and her family moved to Jamaica Plain, Massachusetts in 1936 during the economic downturn. She was very close to New England. She attended Smith College, which is a private women's liberal arts college in Massachusetts. She later taught at Smith College, while her husband, Ted Hughes, also taught in New England. And so she did not pass away in New England. She passed away in London, but it's an area that had a profound effect on Plath. There's also a similar fashion style between the two women. You can see that they wear simplistic, flattering clothing. I already talked about the red lipstick connection, but you can see that there's this recurrence of skirts, blouses, sweater tops, and so I think that the fashion is also similar between Swift and Plath. Plath honeymooned with her husband Ted Hughes in 1956, and they were married only after knowing each other a few months. She met him because she had read some of his poems in a magazine, and she was very impressed, and she wanted to meet him. And so she went to this little celebration, and that's where they met. He came back to Cambridge, and they got married a few months later. Her mother attended the wedding, and Ted Hughes' sister attended the wedding, but it was a very small wedding. And then for their honeymoon, they went to Paris and also Venice. And we can see Plath here in Venice on the canals. It's probably my favorite comparative photo with Taylor Swift also in Venice. And you can see the red in both of their hair, headband and hat. You can see that it's cold when they both went. They're bundled up. You can see that both ladies had a brown purse, which they are clutching, arms folded over it, and they're both next to the water. So this is probably my most favorite comparative photo between the two, because you can see that sort of similarity, that femininity coming across. Taylor Swift also found herself in relationships with Englishmen, just like Sylvia Plath. And so in 2012, she dated the musician Harry Styles. The relationship did not work out. If you compare Plath's love to Hughes, where she described him as a singer, storyteller, lion, and world wanderer with a voice like the thunder of God, it was just love at first sight, head over heels for Plath, and supposedly Plath bit Ted Hughes the first time she met him, and this has been dramatized and it's been shown in films, and you don't have that with Taylor Swift and Harry Styles. You also have Taylor Swift dating Tom Hiddleston in 2016, another Englishman, another actor, but again, you just don't see this bright flame that was between Plath and Hughes. And then currently, Swift is in a relationship with Joe Alwyn. Joe Alwyn's family comes from Kent, England. Ted Hughes' family comes from Yorkshire, and Yorkshire had a huge impact on Ted Hughes. I mean, an insane impact. The mysticism of Yorkshire, the nature of Yorkshire, from the foxes to the ravens to the pike, had a huge impact on Hughes. And so you see this in his artwork, in his poetry, and in his work when he eventually became poet laureate for Great Britain. Joe Alwyn's family is not a writing family, but is a musical family. Joe Alwyn's grandfather was a composer, and so you see Joe Alwyn being very skilled at the piano, and this influencing Taylor Swift's artwork. So again, between the two women, we see these successful relationships come out of work with artists. And Ted Hughes was a very accomplished poet. He had been publishing poetry when Plath met him, and so it was something that she was very proud of, and she actually submitted a lot of his work for publication in the United States. Their relationship was very toxic in many ways. She claimed that he beat her, and that's why she had a miscarriage in 1961. She addressed this in her poem Parliament Hill Fields, and we also see hill imagery in Taylor Swift's work. And so I don't know if that's true. Plath would sometimes exaggerate her relationship with Hughes, and it was just very difficult for both of them. Plath did not appreciate Hughes in many ways, and Hughes did not appreciate Plath in many ways. And so this was a relationship, while it was white hot and led to remarkable work from both of them. Plath published her first collection of poetry, The Colossus, in 1960, while being married to Hughes. And Hughes, just his career took off. He was a professor, and he was able to publish poetry while Plath took care of their children. And it's unfortunate that it was just so, manic. And unfortunately, Hughes started cheating on Plath with a woman named Asha Weville, and that was just so toxic and such a horrible thing to do to Plath, who was extra sensitive. And Hughes knew that she poured a lot of herself into her work. And so I believe Hughes was haunted by Plath. I believe that she was just one of the most intense figures of his life, and there was no way that she would not have had an impact on him even after her death. And so this theme is explored in his work, Birthday Letters. By the time Plath died in 1963, she had tried several times to take her own life. As I mentioned before, she overdosed on sleeping pills, and then in June 1962, she drove her car off the side of the road into a river, which she later said was an attempt to take her own life. By 1963, she was in bad shape, Hughes had left her for Asha, and she had lost 20 pounds, and she was taking care of the two children by herself, and she was in London, which was not entirely familiar to her, and she wasn't a big fan of England, describing it as a place where all the cars were old and everything was just colored black. She struggled with insomnia and took medication at night to induce her sleep, and frequently woke up early. And she talked to her neighbors about feeling strange, and she did call a nurse to come with her. It was actually Hughes who wanted to have a nurse with her, and so unfortunately the nurse arrived and could not get into the flat, but eventually gained access in February 1963, and when she did, they found Plath dead with her head in the oven, and she had sealed the rooms between her and her sleeping children with tape towels and cloths, and had left them milk to drink. And it was something that impacted her husband, Hughes. They had not been divorced by the time of her death. He had said he was going to leave her, but the divorce hadn't happened yet, and it affected him for the rest of his life. And so, this is just incredibly sad. Plath's works remain an inspiration to many people, including women, and so her legacy does live on, and it's similar to Taylor Swift, who actually has a very positive legacy during life. She's donated hundreds of tickets to police departments. She's donated money. She's very philanthropic. And so with both women, we see this intent on a positive legacy and leaving something behind that can be enjoyed by everybody. And so it really takes, bravery to establish something like that.